Hey guys, this is Mrs. Phillips here. Today we are going to read the Greek myth, The Midas Touch, and we are going to focus on the different parts of the story, like the character and the character traits. Let's look at the graphic organizer over here. The problem, the solution, and the action of the characters, and why they did it, the motivation. And then we're going to talk about the moral of the myth, but we're going to do that part, the moral of the myth, tomorrow. Today we're just going to focus on all the other parts. So, your graphic organizer in the independent practice part looks just like this, but the only difference is that you will have a different myth to read. So I want you to really pay attention to all the different parts so that you are able to fill out your graphic organizer with your very own myth after you've watched this video. Okay, the Midas Touch. In Greece, there lived a very rich king named Midas. Midas had more gold than anyone else, and he loved gold more than anything else, even his little daughter Marigold. One day a fairy boy appeared before Midas. While he was counting and admiring his gold, the fairy boy offered Midas one wish. Midas wished that everything he touched would turn to gold. So I'm seeing that Midas is very, very, very concerned with his gold. He loves it more than his daughter Marigold. And to me, that is telling me that he is very greedy and very selfish. But I want to continue reading to make sure that I have the right character traits for him. The fairy boy asked him if he was sure and warned King Midas that he may not like his wish. Midas said he was sure, and the fairy boy told him that the wish would take effect the next morning. When Midas awoke, he tried out his new gift, and it worked. He ran all around his palace and garden, turning everything to gold. Finally, it became lunchtime, and Midas was getting hungry. He sat down to eat, but even his food and water turned to gold. Midas was very upset. Just then, his daughter, Marigold, came running into the room. Midas reached out to hug her, and instantly she turned to gold. King Midas was very upset and began crying and begging for the fairy to come back and take away the gift. The fairy boy appeared, and since he could see that King Midas had learned his lesson, he took away the gift, and from that day King Midas was always grateful for what he had. He enjoyed many wonderful days just enjoying his little daughter's company. Okay, so some of you may remember that we've read this myth before when we were learning about plays. But this time, instead of talking about plays, we're going to be focusing on all the things that we focused on last week with fables, but applying those parts to myths. So I want to go over to the graphic organizer so that I can see what we're going to do first. So first, we are going to look at the characters and their traits. So if I go back in here, I see that there are three main characters. That is Midas, Marigold, and the fairy boy. In other versions of this myth, Marigold has a bigger part, but in this particular version that we're reading, there's not a whole lot on her. So I'm going to focus on two characters, Midas and the fairy boy. So let's go over here, and I'm going to write in Midas and fairy boy. Now, I want to look back in the passage. Anytime you're trying to answer questions or fill out a graphic organizer, you want to go back to the passage and make sure that you can find text evidence for the things that you are thinking are the correct answer. If you cannot find the text evidence, then it's likely that that might not be the answer. So you definitely want to take a look. So I mentioned earlier that I thought that King Midas was selfish and greedy. So I'm going to look through here, and in the first paragraph, I see that he loved gold more than anything else, even his little daughter Marigold. Well, that's pretty big. Most people love their children more than they love gold, but not this guy. This guy loved his gold more than his daughter. Also, he wished that everything he touched would turn to gold, right? Even though he was warned that he may not like his wish by fairy gold, he still said that, nope, I'm still sure. I'm willing to take that chance. So I'm going to put over here that Midas is greedy, and I'm going to slash because for sake of space, because I don't have a lot of space, selfish. And I know this because he loved gold more than his daughter. And I'm going to go over here on the side because you will have more space than me when you're typing it, but I don't have as much space because your space will grow than his daughter. Okay, now let's look at the fairy. So the fairy, he warned him. So I'm going to circle that part, warned King Midas, right? When he was making a wish that could have really bad consequences. But Midas said he still wanted to do that, right? So he did grant him the wish. But after all of the story, and after Midas ends up turning his daughter into gold and becoming very upset about it, the fairy boy reappeared, right? And he said that he could see that King Midas had learned his lesson, right? So let me go back. I forgot one thing. King Midas had begged to take away the gift. And the fairy boy realized that he did learn his lesson, that King Midas did learn his lesson. So he took that gift away because he did not think that King Midas was greedy or selfish anymore. He learned his lesson, right? So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to say, thinking about him being willing to take away that wish after seeing that Midas had learned his lesson, I think that this character is forgiving, right? He forgave him. He's forgiving and he's caring because he thought that, you know what, I'm going to take away that wish because this guy here has learned his lesson. So he's forgiving and caring because he was willing to reverse, that means take away, or go backwards in something, reverse the wish. And that is because he saw that King Midas had learned his lesson. Now let's look at problem and solution. Okay, so problem and solution. Well, the problem is that King Midas wished that everything turned to gold, and then what happened was everything turned to gold, right? I mean, he was hungry, and then he went to eat, but even his food and water turned to gold. And then when he reached out to hug his daughter, she turned to gold. That's a big problem. So I'm going to put under problem that everything King Midas touched turned to gold. Now, the solution. Well, in this, King Midas began begging for the fairy to come back, right? And to please take away this gift. Well, the fairy boy decided to reverse that spell because he saw that King Midas had learned his lesson. So I'm going to go back here. So the solution was that after Midas begged to reverse the spell, fairy boy took away the gift. Or in this case, it was a curse. And it took away the gift. Now, let's look at action. So, we're looking at the actions of the characters, and I'm only going to focus on two because this is a pretty short myth here. And King Midas wished that everything he touched would turn to gold. Okay? So that was an action. So he wished for it, right? He made a wish. So King Midas, I'm going to put a little dot there. King Midas wished for everything he touched to turn to gold. Now let's talk about motivation. That's the why King Midas would do that. Why would King Midas do that? Well, if you look at the beginning parts of this myth, King Midas had more gold than anyone else. But yet, he loved gold more than anything else, even his daughter. And even though he had more gold than anyone else, he wanted more. He was always counting and admiring his gold. So, I'm looking at all of the details in the text, and I am noticing that King Midas's motivation, the reason why he did it, is because of greed. Even though he had enough, he had more than enough, he wanted more. So King Midas was greedy and he wanted more. Okay? Now, let's look at Fairy Boy. I'm going to focus on the part where he took away the gift or reversed the spell. So Fairy Boy reversed the spell. Now, that's the action. Now, why did Fairy Boy reverse the spell? Well, we have to look at some of the text to figure that out. So I'm looking, and it says directly in the text that he could see that King Midas had learned his lesson. So, because he knew that King Midas had learned his lesson, he decided to reverse the spell. So I'm going to put Fairy Boy for action, reversed the spell. Now, Fairy Boy's motivation for that was that he realized that Midas learned his lesson. So he had some compassion, right? He had some care in that heart. So, now that we've gotten all these parts, this is going to help us for our next part tomorrow, determining the moral of the myth. But for now, what I want you to do is to go to the independent part of reading, to read your new myth, and I want you to do exactly what I did here for King Midas, but you do it for the myth that you have assigned. So don't forget to click directly on the link, and it'll take you there, and to include that text evidence that helps you to make sure that you have the right answer. All right, guys, good luck.